Hi there. So, you know my name, I'm Cindy. And my husband and I own a restaurant called Passionfish, just right across the bay. It's in Pacific Grove, and I feel really blessed to be working with the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation on the outreach of the MPAs, because I really feel like for California and probably globally, they are one of the real answers that we have to the health of our oceans. So I always like to just tell everybody that, you know, you've already heard from all the smart people today. And so what you want to kind of think of is I'm now your finishing entertainment for the day. You are going to have to sit through some 8mm films that my grandfather shot, and there's very few faces in them. They're very, very grainy. They were shot during the 50s and the very early 60s, but you will see a lot of fish. And you will see fish that the size of don't really exist today. And then I will kind of give you a historical perspective of what it's like to be part of a family who's lived for 5 generations on the Monterey Bay. I'm the daughter of a commercial fisherman, and my grandfather also commercially fished. So when Dennis called me and said, could you give kind of a historical perspective, I found it kind of interesting that somebody thought I was even old enough to have a historical perspective. I'm a grandmother now, so it's starting to make sense. So I love this picture. This is a reminder to me of what my bay used to look like. This is obviously Monterey Bay, which that is the building where Monterey Fish and Royal Fish operate out of. You see the big trawlers in the background. You can even see the masts from the trawlers on the other side of the building there. And then you have the little small fishing skiffs, because there was a very large handline community and pole fishing community in Monterey Bay, right up through till my father quit fishing, which was probably the late 70s. It just became very, very difficult for them as the fisheries became smaller and smaller for them to compete with the larger harvesting boats. And this is before they built all the little, well, they built the breakwater there that runs off between the 2 wharfs, and they moved the boat jetty, and then they built a lot of slips for the recreational fishermen and the sailing boats. So this is the beginning of the films. My family's lived on the Monterey Peninsula. What we have now is 5 generations with the birth of my granddaughter, and I have another one on the way. I was the first generation in my family that did not look to the harvest of the oceans to support my family. And my dad used to love to tell me that I was born and raised on the wharf. He told me that all the time, and I believed him. And my mom used to tell me that the fact of the matter was, I was born at the old Monterey Hospital. They took me out of the hospital, and my first visit was the wharf. That was the first place outside of the hospital. And my father handed me around to all these dirty fishermen, and the smell of bait, and, you know, really smelled bad. And she took me home, and I had my very first bath on like the 2nd day of my life, because she was trying to wash the stench of the bait off of me. As I grew up, everything in my life was about the ocean. When I began to teeth, my teething tools were octopus tentacles that my father and my grandfather would make for me. They would bring home the octopuses, and they would boil the tentacles, they would peel them, they would salt them, and they would give them to me, and that is what I teethed on. As I grew, I devoured hordes and hordes of smoked fish, because my father smoked for all of the markets down on the wharf. So in general, from the very beginning, my life was completely nurtured and sustained by the ocean and the fishermen of my life. The smells of the wharf, that old oil that came up off of the wood, the heat from the pavement, that smell of rotting bait, the boats, the stench of the fishermen, those iron anchors on the wharf. I used to love to lay on them. They'd warm up your belly and you roll all around on them. Those were as much a part of my childhood as the other kids in the neighborhood were spending time on their swing sets and their slides and going to the local park. I learned to clean fish standing on a 5-gallon bucket that was upturned between 2 older brothers. Let's see. No, Dad. You gotta have a beer when you're a fisherman. We used to walk the railroad tracks, and we collected lead. Years and years ago, when the railroad tracks were built, they ran what is now the bike path. That was a railroad track. And the Army Corps of Engineers came in, and they just filled it up with lead, which, then in the 80s was a big issue for the sanctuary. But we used to go along with little buckets, and we'd fill up our buckets with little pieces of lead, and we'd take it home, and my dad would toss it into a pot, and he would melt it down next to a pot of spaghetti. The lead would, pop, and we always had little pieces of lead up on our ceiling. And while my mom was cooking, then my dad was pouring the melted lead into molds, and we had ounces to pound molds. And then we would put them back in our little buckets, and the next day we would walk up and down the wharf or up and down the beach, and all the fishermen knew that these were Okies kids, and everybody bought their sinkers from us because we had a really good reputation for all of those sinkers. When other children were learning the meaning of hot, from hot water, sticking your toe in a hot bath or grabbing your mother's pen, we learned the meaning of hot by grabbing one of my dad's freshly molded sinkers, and you never ever did that again. It was ingrained what the word hot was. Other children learned the art of building forts and baking in the kitchen with their mothers, and we learned to tie hooks. We learned to clean squid. We learned the importance of fishing for bait every single night after dinner, because my father used it the next day, and we had a worm box, and that was very important too. Taking care of the worm box was a nightly chore that we took turns doing. We would walk the wharf with my dad and the other pole fishermen when the trawlers and the gill netters unloaded, and we watched an enormous amount of bycatch hauled up. We would see sea stars, basking sharks, sea otters, sea lions, just everything that you can imagine. And the fishermen would roll out those trawl nets and those gill nets, and they would repair them right there on the wharf. A lot of the repairs were done up at Fisherman's Flat, but some of it was done right on the wharf. My dad and his pole fishing friends would tell us that these trawlers were destroying the bay, that they were limiting the ability of the pole fishermen to continue to support their families, which as a small child, that was me. And so those boats were really scary to me. When I saw those boats, they were like scary monsters. On good days on the wharf, my brothers and I would keep ourselves occupied by jumping off the side of the wharf and trying to catch a ride on a mola or sunfish. You might know it as a sunfish. They're the boniest fish in the ocean. They get very, very large and come up to the surface and lay sideways and catch the sun. And if you're a little, 8 or 9-year-old kid, it looks like, you could just climb up on, laying on top of them. And so we'd make each other bets, and we'd try to climb up on top of those sunfish. We had these enormous tractor tire inner tubes that my dad had painted our names in bright green. And we would go out in these tractor tire inner tubes, and when I was very small, I was too little, I'd fall through the hole, and so I would sit with my brothers. And we would float right up next to basking sharks, and the only rule was that we couldn't get near their tail. My father said, always stay away from the tail. And we could float right up next to him and reach out and touch him, and that was a lot of fun. We would float underneath the wharf and do what I now know is really terrible things and pry the starfish off of the pilings. We did all kinds of stuff. We had whale calves that used to come in and swim up along the side of the wharf. My dad always used to tell us, they're lost, and I have no idea if they were lost, but we liked seeing them. There was always a diverse amount of jellies. If you laid on your stomach, you could look through the little hole of the inner tube, and you could look at everything underneath. And my father, of course, would tell us all the names of everything. We were notorious for bothering the sea lions. We would take the bait. I would get into a ton of trouble. We'd take our bait, and we would try to coax the sea lions out from underneath the wharf with the bait. To us, they weren't creatures that we were supposed to be afraid of. Other kids had dogs and cats, and we had like sea lions that we played with during the day. And that's what they were for us. They were our playmates. I would follow my brothers, my 2 older brothers, on Fisherman's Wharf, which everybody kind of knows is the tourist wharf now. And we had this little game that we would play where we would start, at the beginning of the wharf, and whoever made it to the end of the wharf without falling in was the winner. What we did was we went under the wharf on the piling, so we had to climb, from piling to piling. We had to climb over sea lions, around sea lions, and, very seldom did we ever make it to the end. We always ended up in the water because the sea lions scared us or something.